For 8 years, you've been torturing yourself over your husband's death. But the truth is, I gave the order, and 2 years later, I killed the man who pulled that trigger. Catherine's hands trembled. The rifle wavered. The man she'd hated for 8 years had just taken a bullet meant for her. Why would you do all of this? Because the world needs Shadow Tracker back, even if it cost me my freedom. But to understand this moment, we need to go back 72 hours earlier. Before we dive in, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from right now. Now, let's begin. They say the past is a place where you bury what you cannot live with. They are wrong. The past only lies still, patient as stone, waiting for someone to dig it up. The afternoon sun bleeds red across Devil's Playground Canyon. Shadows stretch long and hungry across ancient rock faces that have witnessed 100 years of violence. The wind carries the scent of sage and gunpowder, a combination as old as the territory itself. Catherine Hayes stands on an outcropping of stone 30 feet above the canyon floor. Her silver-streaked hair whips in the desert wind, dark strands dancing against the dying light. She is 47 years old, but the rifle in her hands holds steady with the certainty of someone half her age. Her buckskin jacket, stained dark with blood, long-figurated shoulder moves without her breathing. Slow, controlled. The breath of a hunter who learned long ago that survival belongs to those who can wait. Below her, Marcus Kane leans against a boulder, his left shoulder torn open by a bullet that found its mark 3 minutes ago. Blood runs dark down his vest, pooling in the dust at his boots. He is 53, gray-bearded, with a scar running the length of his left cheek like a dried riverbed. His black hat lies in the dirt beside him. He should be afraid. Instead, he smiles. 8 years, Sarah. His voice carries easily in the canyon's natural amphitheater. 8 years I've waited for this moment. Catherine's finger rests outside the trigger guard. Not yet. Never yet until you're certain. Don't call me by that name. Her voice is frost over stone. Sarah Hayes died at Samarin Pass. Kane's smile doesn't falter. Blood loss should make a man weak, delirious, but his eyes remain clear-focused with an intensity that speaks of purpose beyond pain. No, you only hid, same as me. The sound of hoofbeats echoes from somewhere beyond the canyon walls. Someone is coming. The posse, perhaps, or something worse. 72 hours earlier, the morning came to Shadow Ridge Ranch the way it always did. Quiet, relentless, indifferent to human need. Catherine woke at 5, same as every morning for the past 8 years. Her small cabin held the chill of an Arizona February, cold enough to see breath, but not cold enough to justify a fire. She lay still for a moment, listening to the silence. No birdsong yet. Too early. But somewhere out past the corral, a coyote called to its mate, a sound both lonely and defiant. She recognized that loneliness, had worn it like a second skin since the day they buried Daniel. She rose her right shoulder, protesting with the familiar ache that came with weather changes. The old bullet wound never truly healed, just learned to lie dormant until cold or exertion reminded her of Samarin Pass, of the price of arrogance. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, both sparse. A woman living here had shed everything that wasn't essential, stripped her life down to the bones of survival. She dressed in the dark, pulling on worn denim and a cotton shirt faded from too many washings. Her boots were good leather, resoled, twice the kind you kept until they fell apart, because good boots in this country meant the difference between walking home and dying in the Badlands. She moved to the small mirror above her wash basin. The face that looked back carried 47 years like a ledger of hard choices. Silver threaded through dark hair that she kept long, usually braided. Her eyes were copper-colored, a gift from her mother's Apache heritage, though most people in Copper Springs never looked close enough to notice. They saw a widow who kept to herself, a woman who trained horses with an unusual gift for reading their temperament. They didn't see Shadow Tracker. That ghost had been buried with Sarah Hayes. The coffee was bitter, strong enough to wake the dead. She drank it standing on the porch, watching the eastern sky lighten from black to deep blue to the pale gold of dawn. The ranch spread out before her in shades of gray and brown, 100 acres of scrubland that fought her for every blade of grass, every drop of water. 2 other horses besides Ash stood in the far corral, both geldings she was training for the Caldwell Ranch. Good animals. Responsive, but not like Ash. Ash, she frowned, setting down her cup. Normally by now she would hear his greeting, a low nicker that carried from the stable. The silver dun had greeted every morning this way for 5 years, ever since she gentled him from the wild Mustang her grandfather had gifted her before his death. Silence. Catherine's hand moved instinctively to her hip, where for 8 years no gun had rested. The old habit died hard. She walked toward the stable, her stride lengthening with each step. Something was wrong. A tracker learned to trust that feeling, that prickling awareness that came from the hindbrain, the ancient part that remembered when humans were prey. The stable door stood open. She had closed it last night. She remembered the action clearly, the way you remember things done 1,000 times. Close the door. Check the lock. A simple brass padlock, nothing fancy but enough to keep the latch secure. The lock lay on the ground, not broken, cut. The shearing was clean, professional, done with wire cutters designed for exactly this purpose. Catherine knelt beside it, her fingers hovering just above the dust without touching. Reading the ground the way Gray Eagle had taught her when she was 12 years old, and the world still made sense. 4 men. The boot prints were clear in the soft earth around the stable. One man walked with a limp favoring his right leg. Another wore expensive boots, tooled leather with a narrow heel. Not local. Locals wore work boots, practical and sturdy. These were the boots of a man who wanted to be noticed. She moved to the stable entrance, her breathing steady despite the cold spreading through her chest. Inside, the silver dun's stall stood empty. Fresh hay lay scattered where he'd fought against being let out. Scuff marks near the water trough showed where he'd planted his feet, resisting. It would have taken at least 2 men to move him. Ash didn't yield easily. Near the door, half buried in disturbed straw, something gleamed in the early light. Catherine reached down and picked it up. A brass button stamped with the image of a scorpion. Her hand closed around it, metal biting into her palm. She knew this button, had seen it 8 years ago on a man's vest as he stood above her husband's body, his face a mask of horror that haunted her dreams. Marcus Kane. The name came with a flood of memories she'd spent 8 years trying to drown. Kane, leader of the Scorpion Gang. The man whose brother she'd tracked across 3 territories and delivered to justice. The man who'd sworn revenge. The man who'd set the ambush at Samarin Pass that had killed Daniel and nearly killed her. And now he'd found her. Catherine stood slowly, her joints protesting. She walked back to the cabin with measured steps, each one deliberate, controlled. Inside, she moved to the loose floorboard beneath her bed and pried it up. The wooden box beneath hadn't been touched in 8 years. Turquoise inlay caught the morning light as she lifted the lid. Inside lay the tools of her former life. A Colt revolver, custom-made, the barrel etched with delicate engravings of running horses. The gun oil she'd applied before putting it away still preserved the metal, kept rust at bay, even in this dry climate. Beside it, a brass telescope, compact and powerful. A leather journal filled with tracking notes in her own hand, observations about terrain and weather, and the way men moved through wilderness when they thought no one was watching. And beneath it all, a silver star. Not the local badge of a town marshal, but the federal shield that marked her as something more. United States Marshal, Northern Arizona Territory. The commission papers lay beneath it, signed by a federal judge who'd believed a woman could do this work as well as any man. Better, actually. The statistics proved it. Sarah Shadow Tracker Hayes had the highest capture rate of any marshal in the territory. 147 fugitives brought in. Only 2 had escaped her. Marcus Kane was one of them. Her fingers traced the star's edges. For 8 years, this badge had stayed hidden. For 8 years, she'd told herself that part of her life was over-finished, buried with the woman she'd been. She lifted out a photograph, edges worn from handling. Daniel Hayes looked out from the image, 42 years old, handsome in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors. Marshall's badge on his chest, his arm around a younger Catherine, both of them smiling. Taken 6 months before Samarin Pass. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the photograph. "I'm so sorry." The memory came unbidden. Samarin Pass. Daniel's voice. "Stay behind cover, Sarah. I'll circle around." Her own voice, too confident, too certain. "I've got the shot. Trust me." The crack of gunfire. Daniel falling. The searing pain in her shoulder as she went down beside him. Marcus Kane's face horrified, shouting at his men. The sound of retreat. And Daniel's hand in hers growing cold. She'd blamed Kane for 8 years. hated him with a purity that had sustained her through the grief, through the long nights when the guilt threatened to drown her. But in her honest moments, the ones that came at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't hold, she knew the truth. Her arrogance had killed Daniel. Her certainty that she was the best, that she couldn't be outmaneuvered, had walked them straight into Cain's trap. Catherine set the photograph aside and began loading the Colt. The muscle memory came back instantly. 6 rounds, each one seated perfectly. She checked the action, the cylinder rotation. Still smooth, still deadly. The knock at the door came as she was sliding the revolver into her waistband. "Mrs. Hayes, you home," Deputy Ben Cooper. Young Ernest, fresh-faced enough that she suspected he still got carded in saloons. Catherine covered the gun with her shirt and opened the door. "Morning, Deputy." Ben stood on her porch, hat in his hands, concern written across his features. "Ma'am, I was just checking in. We've had some trouble in the valley." "What kind of trouble?" "Horse theft. 11 heads stolen last night from ranches all across the valley. The Caldwell place lost 3 of their best quarter horses. Murphy brothers lost 2 from their north pasture." He paused, then added, "I noticed your stable door was open. Everything all right?" Catherine's face remained neutral, years of practice keeping her emotions locked away. "Someone took Ash during the night." Ben's eyes widened. "You're silver done, Mrs. Hayes. I'm real sorry. That's—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Marshal Bradford is organizing a posse. We ride out at noon. If you want to come identify him when we find them horses." "I appreciate that, Deputy. I need to secure my other stock first. Tell the Marshal I'll meet him at the town hall." After Ben left, Catherine stood on her porch and looked out at the empty corral. Ash wasn't just a horse. He was the last living connection to Gray Eagle, to the grandfather who'd raised her after the border raid that killed her parents. Gray Eagle had given her Ash's damn war spirit with instructions that when the mare foaled, Catherine was to keep the colt. Train him in the old ways, preserve the bloodline of the Apache war horses that had carried warriors across this land for generations. Ash was that colt. And now Marcus Cain had him. Catherine went back inside and gathered the rest of her gear. The Winchester rifle from the closet, the saddlebags with her tracking tools, small items most people wouldn't recognize, magnifying lenses for reading disturbed earth, a compass modified for desert navigation, a small kit for making casts of footprints in various soils, and the beaded leather pouch her grandfather had given her when she was 15. Inside were owl feathers, small stones with natural holes worn through them, and a mixture of sacred herbs. Tools for tracking in the Apache way, reading signs most white men dismissed as superstition. She changed into her tracking clothes, the ones she hadn't worn since Samarin Pass. Dark buckskin jacket with hidden pockets, reinforced riding pants, moccasin boots that made almost no sound when she walked. The transformation was complete when she braided her hair tight and pinned it under a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. Looking in the mirror, Catherine barely recognized herself. The widow had vanished. In her place stood someone harder, sharper, someone who'd hunted men across 3 territories and never lost a trail. Shadow Tracker. The morning sun stretched long across the land as Catherine prepared to leave. She saddled a borrowed Appaloosa from her neighbor's ranch, a strong mare with good endurance. As she worked, her mind was already tracking, already seeing the patterns. 4 men, 11 horses. They'd need water, rest points, places to hide that many animals. The route south toward Mexico made sense. The border was porous, enforcement thin. Once across the line, the horses could disappear into the interior, sold to buyers who didn't ask questions. But something didn't fit. Marcus Cain was many things, but he wasn't a common horse thief. This was personal. The button left behind wasn't an accident. It was a message. He wanted her to follow. The question was why? Revenge for his brother, possibly. But 8 years was a long time to wait. And if Cain simply wanted her dead, there were easier ways. A rifle shot from distance, poison in her well, an ambush in the Badlands where no one would find her body. No, Cain wanted something more than her death. He wanted her to come to him. And that meant this was about more than stolen horses. Catherine finished checking her gear and mounted the Appaloosa. The mare shifted beneath her, sensing the tension in her rider's body. She patted the horse's neck, murmuring soft words in a mixture of English and Apache, the language Gray Eagle had taught her. "Easy, girl. We've got a long road ahead." As she rode away from Shadow Ridge Ranch, Catherine didn't look back. Looking back was for people who had something to lose. She'd already lost everything that mattered 8 years ago. All that remained was the hunt. And Catherine Hayes had never lost a trail in her life. The town of Copper Springs had grown since Catherine first arrived 8 years ago. What began as a single-street settlement servicing the copper mines had expanded into a proper town, complete with a church, a school, and a two-story hotel that catered to mining executives from back east. The population had swelled to nearly 300 souls, most of them decent people trying to build lives in unforgiving country. The town hall, modest wooden structure at the intersection of Main and Prospect, was packed when Catherine arrived. Every rancher in the valley seemed to be present, their voices rising in anger and frustration. She slipped in through the back door, preferring to observe rather than be observed. Marshal Thomas Bradford stood at the front of the room, a big man running to fat in his late 50s, his weathered face showing the strain of trying to maintain order. Beside him, Deputy Ben Cooper struggled to write down descriptions of the stolen horses in a battered ledger, his young face flushed with the effort. "Folks, I need you to settle down." Bradford's voice carried the authority of 30 years wearing a badge. "Getting riled up won't bring those horses back. Now I'm organizing a posse to ride out this afternoon. We'll track these thieves and recover your property." "With all due respect, Marshal," Otis Caldwell spoke up, his cultured Boston accent standing out among the frontier drawl. "Those thieves have a 12-hour head start, and there hasn't been rain in weeks. The ground's harder than granite. There won't be any tracks to follow." "You got a better idea, Otis." Caldwell smoothed his expensive waistcoat, every inch the wealthy rancher. "Telegraph Santa Fe. Bring in experienced trackers from the territorial marshal's office, men who know what they're doing." "That'll take 2 days minimum," Bradford shot back. "By then those horses will be in Mexico, or buried so deep in the dragoons we'll never find them." The argument circled, going nowhere, burning time. Catherine remained silent against the back wall, her eyes taking in details. Otis Caldwell's boots were hand-tooled expensive. His ranch was the largest in the valley, yet he seemed more annoyed than genuinely worried about the loss. The other ranchers showed real fear. For them, those horses represented survival, feed bills, breeding stock, the difference between making it through another year or losing everything. "Mrs. Hayes," Ben Cooper's voice cut through the noise, turning every head in the room. Catherine felt their eyes on her, saw the curiosity mixed with something else. Doubt, perhaps. What could a widow who raised horses possibly contribute? "Deputy." She kept her voice level, uninflected. "You discovered the theft first, ma'am. Did you see anything unusual? Anything that might help?" The room fell quiet. Catherine weighed her options. Stay silent, and they'd blunder around for days. Speak up, and questions would follow. Questions she'd spent 8 years avoiding. Lives and livelihoods hung in the balance. She stepped forward, pulling a small notebook from her jacket pocket. "The lock on my stable was cut with Mexican wire cutters. Not the kind ordinary thieves carry. The cutting pattern is distinctive." Marshal Bradford frowned. "And how would you know that Mrs. Hayes—" "My late husband traded with vaqueros from Sonora. I learned to recognize their tools." "Not a lie, just not the whole truth." "The thieves also laid false trails. Obvious signs point east toward Diamondback Pass, but the horses were driven south." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Otis Caldwell's eyebrows rose. "How can you possibly know that—" Catherine opened her notebook, turning it so the assembled men could see her sketches. "One of their mounts has a custom shoe, unusual wear pattern on the right front hoof. That mark appears on the southern trail, hidden under brush they disturb while passing. The eastern trail shows too many obvious signs. Boot prints press deep branches broken at shoulder height. It's deliberately visible, meant to be found." The skepticism in the room shifted to something else. Interest. Hope. One of the smaller ranchers, a weathered man named Pike Dorn, leaned forward. "You can read all that from some scratches in the dirt. Tracking isn't magic, Mr. Dorn. It's observation and experience." Dr. Grace Miller, one of the few who'd made any effort to truly know Catherine over the years, stepped forward with a small smile. "Perhaps you gentlemen don't realize that Mrs. Hayes has found strayed livestock for half this valley. Just last month, she tracked down the carpenter's boy after he wandered into the Badlands during a dust storm. Finding a lost calf ain't the same as tracking organized rustlers." Otis Caldwell interjected, his voice carrying an edge. Catherine met his gaze steadily. My observations are yours to use or ignore, Mr. Caldwell. I only thought they might help. At the front of the room, Marshal Bradford studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. You know, he said slowly, you remind me of someone. Years back, federal marshals used to talk about a woman tracker. Said she could follow a man across 3 territories without losing the trail. Some kind of legend. He paused, his gaze sharpening. They called her Shadow Tracker. The room went dead silent. Catherine felt Grace's eyes on her, concerned. The other ranchers looked confused, uncomprehending. But Bradford's expression said he'd put pieces together. Sounds like campfire stories, Marshal, Catherine said evenly. Maybe. Bradford's tone suggested he didn't believe that for a second. But I'd be a fool to ignore solid information no matter where it comes from. Mrs. Hayes, would you show us on the map exactly where you believe they went? Catherine moved to the large territory map mounted on the wall. She took the offered pencil and began marking with quick, precise strokes. Not just direction, but the most likely route based on terrain, water access, and the challenge of moving 11 horses quickly. Her hand moved with the certainty of someone who'd done this 100 times, reading land as easily as others read books. They'll avoid main trails but can't push 11 horses through tight canyon country. They'll use game paths here, here, and here. She marked 3 points. They'll need water by midday in this heat, which makes Sidewinder Creek their most likely first stop. After that, they'll head for either Dead Man's Pass or Devil's Playground, depending on whether they think they're being followed. The assembled men leaned closer, skepticism giving way to grudging respect. Ben Cooper's eyes were wide with admiration. That's remarkable tracking, ma'am. It's just observation, deputy. But her eyes, copper bright in the lamplight, held knowledge that went far deeper than simple observation. And in that moment, standing before the map with confidence born of 15 years hunting men, Catherine Hayes let the mask slip just enough for Thomas Bradford to see the truth. The old marshal's face hardened with certainty. He knew. But to his credit, he said nothing. Instead, he cleared his throat and addressed the room. All right, folks, we ride in 1 hour. Mrs. Hayes, I'd appreciate it if you'd scout ahead, see if you can confirm that southern trail. I'll bring the posse along behind. As the meeting broke up and men dispersed to prepare, Grace caught Catherine's arm and guided her into the small kitchen off the main hall, away from prying ears. You're going after them alone, aren't you? Grace's voice was quiet but firm. Catherine's slight smile was answer enough. Catherine, these aren't desperate thieves. Grace gripped her friend's arm. Organized rustlers kill without hesitation. I know the risks. This isn't just about the horse, is it? Grace searched her face. I've seen that look before. When you're on a trail, you change. Like you're finally allowing yourself to be who you really are. Catherine was silent for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. Grace had earned some truth. She'd treated Catherine's shoulder during a bad flare-up 2 winters ago and never asked the questions the bullet scar invited. 8 years is a long time to bury part of yourself, Catherine said finally. Maybe too long. Cimarron Pass. Grace said it softly, not quite a question. Catherine's eyes snapped to her. How? Army doctor talk. A colleague at Fort Bowie mentioned a tracking mission that went wrong. A female marshal with a shoulder wound. She disappeared afterward. Grace's hand rested gently on Catherine's arm. He never gave a name, but I've treated that scar. I know a bullet wound when I see one. The truth, after 8 years of hiding it, felt strangely liberating. Catherine's shoulders relaxed slightly. Daniel Hayes died because of my overconfidence. I was so certain I could out-track anyone that I led him straight into an ambush. I swore I'd never put anyone else at risk again. She glanced toward the main room where the posse was gathering. That's why I have to do this alone. Grace's grip tightened. Then let me help you prepare. You're struggling with that shoulder, and there's a storm coming in from the south. Catherine nodded. I'll stop by your office before I leave. And Grace, not a word to anyone. I gave my oath to do no harm. Grace's smile was sad. Exposing you would cause harm. But Catherine, be careful. I think Marshal Bradford is already putting pieces together. As they rejoined the main group, Catherine saw Bradford watching her with the calculating gaze of a man who'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize when someone was running from their past. But he said nothing, simply nodded when she caught his eye. The posse was forming up outside Bradford. Ben Cooper, Otis Caldwell, and a dozen ranch hands all checking rifles and loading supplies. They would follow the obvious trails, make plenty of noise, and come back empty-handed within 2 days. Catherine knew this as surely as she knew the sun would set. She would follow what they couldn't see: the compressed soil beneath loose pebbles, the subtle discoloration where crushed lichens stained bare rock, the faint disturbance in a spider's web still trembling from recent passage. Details so small, they vanished to untrained eyes, but together forming a language she'd learned to read fluently. Catherine slipped away from the town hall as the posse continued their preparations. She had work to do, and it required solitude. The kind of tracking her grandfather had taught her wasn't something you could do with a dozen men making noise and disturbing signs. She rode to Grace's clinic, where the doctor had already prepared supplies. Laudanum for pain, though Catherine would use it sparingly. Clean bandages, a salve for the shoulder when the old wound inevitably flared. Grace worked in silence, her practiced hands checking Catherine's range of motion, noting where scar tissue pulled tight. "The weather change will make it worse," Grace warned. "That storm front is bringing cold air." "I'll manage. I know you will." Grace packed the supplies into Catherine's saddlebags. "But managing isn't the same as being smart. Promise me you'll rest when you need to." Catherine promised, though they both knew she wouldn't keep that promise if it meant losing the trail. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Catherine Hayes rode out of Copper Springs on a route that would parallel the posse's path, but keep her far enough away to work undisturbed. She carried the tools of her trade rifle revolver tracking kit and the journal where she'd recorded observations from 100 manhunts. But more than that, she carried the weight of 8 years of guilt, 8 years of hiding, 8 years of being half a person, the other half buried with Daniel at Cimarron Pass. Marcus Kane had stolen her horse, but in doing so, he'd given her something unexpected: a reason to stop hiding, a reason to become whole again, even if that wholeness came wrapped in vengeance. The desert stretched before her, vast and unforgiving. Somewhere out there, Kane was waiting. She could feel it in her bones, that certainty that came from knowing your prey. He wanted her to follow, wanted this confrontation. Catherine had spent 8 years avoiding exactly this moment. But as the ranch lands gave way to badlands and the familiar weight of the hunt settled over her shoulders, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Daniel died: purpose. The sun touched the horizon as she found the first real sign: a patch of disturbed earth near a dry wash hidden beneath a fallen branch that had been deliberately placed. She dismounted and knelt, her fingers reading the story written in dust and stone. 4 horses, heavily laden, moving south at a steady pace, not hurried. Confident. One horse slightly favoring its right foreleg exactly as she'd predicted. And there, pressed into soft sand, protected by an overhang, a perfect hoofprint. Amisha, unshod just as her grandfather had taught her to keep him. The print was fresh, no more than 10 hours old. Catherine stood slowly, her eyes following the trail south into gathering darkness. Behind her, Copper Springs faded into memory. Ahead lay the Badlands, the border, and Marcus Kane. She mounted the Appaloosa and urged the mare forward. The last light painted the rocks in shades of blood and gold, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk called out, lonely and fierce. Catherine Hayes smiled. For the first time in 8 years, she felt like herself. Shadow Tracker rode into the gathering night, following a trail only she could see. The cave system deep in the Dragoon Mountains had sheltered outlaws for 50 years. Apache warriors before that. The stone walls held the scent of smoke, and time carved smooth by centuries of wind and water. Marcus Kane sat near a small fire, its light casting his shadow large against the ancient rock. Before him lay a map, hand-drawn, marked with routes and water sources accumulated over years of running from the law. His fingers, scarred from a lifetime of violence, traced a path from Copper Springs south to the border. But his mind wasn't on the route. It was on a woman he hadn't seen in 8 years. Sarah Hayes, Shadow Tracker. The woman who'd destroyed his family. The woman he'd destroyed in turn. The woman he couldn't forget. Corso Valle, his segundo cleaned a rifle across the fire. 45 years old, lean as a whip, with the hard eyes of a man who'd killed too many times to remember them all. He watched Kane with the wariness of someone who knew his boss wasn't quite right in the head anymore. Boss, I still don't understand this play. Corso's voice carried a slight Mexican accent, remnants of a childhood in Sonora. We got 11 good horses. Could be across the border in 3 days, sell them to Vasquez, make enough to disappear for a year. Why take the silver dun? Why risk everything for one horse? Kane didn't look up from the map. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. A dangerous tone from a dangerous man. Because Ash isn't the target Corso, Shadow Tracker is. So kill her. Rifle shot from distance. Clean. Simple. Now Kane did look up, and Corso flinched from what he saw in those eyes. Not anger. Something worse. Obsession. She deserves better than that. Corso shook his head, confused. You're talking about the woman who put Ives on the gallows. The woman who hunted you across 3 territories. The woman who made you what you are. He gestured at the cave, at the outlaw life they lived. And you think she deserves respect? Kane's smile was bitter. I think she deserves the truth. He stood moving to the cave entrance, where the night spread out like spilled ink. Stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere out there, Sarah Hayes was living a lie, pretending to be someone she wasn't, hiding from the guilt that must eat at her the way it ate at him. 8 years ago, everything had gone wrong at Cimarron Pass. The plan had been simple. Ambush the marshals, capture Sarah Hayes alive, use her as leverage to free Ives from territorial prison. No killing necessary, just a trade. His brother's life for hers. But Jack Morrison, nervous and trigger-happy, had fired too soon. Daniel Hayes had gone down, and with him, Kane's last shred of honor. He tried to stop it, had screamed at Jack to hold fire. Too late, always too late. Kane closed his eyes, seeing it again. Daniel Hayes falling, Sarah's scream raw and animal, the return fire that scattered his men, and Sarah crawling to her husband's body despite the bullet in her shoulder, her hands trying to stop blood that wouldn't stop. He'd watched from the ridge, paralyzed by horror at what his revenge had wrought. When his men finally dragged him away, he'd looked back once. Saw Sarah Hayes holding her dead husband, her face a mask of grief and rage that burned itself into Kane's memory. 2 years later, Kane had found Jack Morrison in a saloon in Tucson. The conversation had been brief. Jack's death had been slow, but killing the man who pulled the trigger hadn't eased the weight. Nothing could. Because Kane knew the truth, Daniel Hayes had died because of him. Not by his hand, but by his order. By his obsession with revenge for a brother who deserved the hanging he got. Ives had been guilty. The Tucson stage robbery, the guard's murder. All of it true. Sarah Hayes had only done her job, tracked a killer, and brought him to justice. Kane had known this even as he'd sworn revenge. Had known it and done it anyway. Boss, Corso's voice pulled him back. You still planning on waiting at Devil's Playground? Yes. And if she doesn't come, Kane's laugh was soft and sad. She'll come, I know her. She won't let Ash go. That horse is more than an animal to her. It's legacy, heritage, the last piece of the grandfather who raised her. He turned back to Corso. She'll come, and when she does, I'll tell her what really happened at Cimarron Pass. Why, Corso's confusion was genuine. What good does truth do now? Because she's been punishing herself for 8 years for something that wasn't her fault. Kane's voice hardened with conviction. Because I've watched her from a distance, seen her bury herself alive in that ranch, becoming half a person. Because Shadow Tracker was the finest tracker the territories ever saw, and the world needs her more than it needs another widow raising horses. Corso studied his boss for a long moment. You're in love with her? No. Kane shook his head. I'm in awe of her. There's a difference. I destroyed the thing I most admired in this world, Corso. Now I'm going to bring it back, even if it costs me everything. He moved back to the fire, pulling out a small leather pouch. Inside were brass buttons stamped with scorpions, his gang's mark. He selected one and held it up to the firelight. Make sure this gets left at the Hayes place. Obvious enough for her to find. You want her to know it's you. I want her to know this is personal, that she's not chasing random horse thieves. She's chasing me. Kane's smile was grim, and Sarah Hayes never could resist a hunt. The Badlands stretched endlessly, a tortured landscape of stone and scrub where nothing soft survived. Catherine rode through it with the ease of someone who'd learned its language young. The Appaloosa beneath her was steady, sure-footed, trained for this terrain. She'd left the last ranch house 5 hours ago. Ahead lay country where only outlaws, Apache, and the very foolish traveled. The kind of country that broke men who didn't respect it. Catherine respected it. More than that, she understood it. She dismounted near a dry wash where yesterday's rain had left a thin crust of mud, now drying in the morning heat. Kneeling, she examined the ground with eyes that saw what others missed. 4 sets of horseshoes clear and distinct. 11 unshod horses, their prints overlapping, nervous. And they're slightly separated from the others, a single set of unshod prints that made her heart clench. The prince told a story. He'd been fighting them, resisting the lead rope. The spacing was wrong, too short, indicating a horse being forced along rather than following willingly. Good. That meant he was healthy enough to fight, strong enough to survive. She stood following the trail with her eyes reading the landscape the way her grandfather had taught her. Gray Eagle had been 70 when he took in a traumatized 8-year-old whose parents had died in a border raid. He'd taught her tracking not as a skill, but as a philosophy, a way of seeing the world. The earth remembers everything, little shadow. His voice came back to her across the years, patient and deep. Every step taken, every breath drawn. Learn to listen, and the earth will tell you its secrets. Catherine closed her eyes, letting the desert speak. The wind from the southwest carrying moisture that promised a storm. The scrape of lizard claws on stone to her left. The absolute silence where birds should be calling. That silence was a signpost as clear as any written word. Something had disturbed the natural pattern. Something large enough to make the desert's small creatures cautious. She opened her eyes and scanned the horizon. There, 3 miles distant, a ridge of red stone that would provide shelter. Perfect for a rest stop. Perfect for men who thought they were being clever. Catherine mounted and adjusted her course, not following the trail directly, but paralleling it, using the terrain to stay hidden. A mistake most trackers made was following too close, too obvious. Better to anticipate, to think like your quarry, to be where they would be rather than where they'd been. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into a furnace. Catherine rationed her water, taking small sips, wetting her lips more than drinking. Desert discipline. Another lesson from Gray Eagle. A memory surfaced sharp and vivid. She'd been 15 on her first solo tracking assignment. A rancher's son had wandered off, and the family feared he'd gotten lost in the canyons. Gray Eagle had sent her alone, testing her. She'd found the boy in 6 hours, following a trail so faint she'd had to crawl on hands and knees to see it. When she brought him home, the boy's mother had wept with gratitude. Gray Eagle had simply nodded. That night, sitting by the fire, he'd given her a gift. A wooden tube carved from mesquite with symbols etched along its length. A call, he explained, for mimicking animal sounds. Hunters use them. Trackers too, when they needed to lure or distract. "You are Shadow Tracker now," he'd said. "This name I give you. Wear it with honor." Catherine touched her saddlebag, where that same call rested 32 years later. Some gifts you carried forever. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of rain. Catherine looked west and saw the darkness gathering. A desert storm, the kind that could drown arroyos in minutes and erase a week's worth of tracks. Most trackers would curse it. Catherine smiled. Gray Eagle's voice again, from some long-ago lesson. The storm does not erase signs, little shadow. It creates new ones. Water flows tell stories. Mud holds memory. The tracker who knows this fears no weather. She urged the Appaloosa into a faster pace. If the storm hit before she reached shelter, she'd be blind for hours. But if she could get ahead of it, the rain would work in her favor, pressing fresh tracks into soft earth, washing away the old, and making the new stand out like ink on paper. The first drops fell as she crested a rise overlooking Sidewinder Creek. Below, recent activity scarred the earth. 11 horses and 4 men had stopped here, watered, rested. The tracks were perhaps 8 hours old, clear enough, despite the dry earth. She studied the pattern. 3 of the men had moved with military precision, spacing themselves for defense-checking sightlines. Professional. But the 4th set of tracks showed hesitation, uncertainty. Someone not entirely comfortable with this work. Catherine filed that observation away. Hesitation could mean weakness. Weakness could be exploited. The rain increased fat drops that hit like bullets. Catherine found an overhang and dismounted, leading the mare under its shelter. She'd wait out the worst of it here, then continue when the rain softened to the kind that helped more than hindered. While she waited, she pulled out her journal and made notes. Not just observations of the trail, but analysis. Kane's pattern, his methods, the places he'd hidden before gleaned from her time hunting him 8 years ago. The man was smart, experienced, knew this country as well as she did. But everyone had habits, patterns they fell into without realizing. Kane liked defensive positions, tight canyons where numbers mattered less than positioning. He'd used them before at Cimarron Pass, would use them again. The thought of Cimarron Pass brought the memory flooding back, unstoppable as the rain. The morning had started clear, brilliant even. Sarah Hayes, 39 years old and at the peak of her career, had ridden beside her husband with the confidence of someone who'd never truly failed. 146 captures, 0 escapes, a perfect record that federal judges spoke of in reverent tones. Daniel Hayes, 42, handsome and steady, had been her partner for 5 years. For that, he'd been her mentor, teaching her the administrative side of marshaling. They'd married 3 years ago, a quiet ceremony with Gray Eagle officiating in the Apache way. "You sure about this route?" Daniel's voice carried concern. He was always the cautious one, balancing Sarah's aggressive instinct with measured consideration. "Kane's heading for the Chiricahua," Sarah replied, absolute certainty in her voice. "I've tracked him through 3 territories. I know his patterns. He's going to ground in the mountains, thinks he can lose us there. And the pass, only route fast enough. He's desperate, running scared. He'll take the risk." Daniel was silent for a moment, then, "Pride kills more marshals than bullets, Sarah." She'd laughed, actually laughed. "This isn't pride. It's experience. I've done this 100 times, Daniel. Trust me." The words haunted her still. Trust me. As if trust could stop bullets. They'd entered Cimarron Pass at noon, the canyon walls rising steep on both sides. Good cover for defenders. Sarah had noted it, filed it away, but dismissed the worry. Kane was running, not setting ambushes, or so she'd thought. The first shot came from nowhere and everywhere, echoing off stone walls until you couldn't tell direction. Daniel's horse screamed and went down. Sarah rolled free, Winchester already in hand, seeking targets. "It's an ambush," Daniel shouted, unnecessary but instinctive. "Fall back." But Sarah was already moving forward, reading the terrain, seeing where the shots originated. 3 positions, maybe 4 shooters. Standard canyon defense. She could flank them, had done it before. "Cover me," she called to Daniel. "I'm going around." Sarah, no two, exposed. But she was already moving, using the rocks for cover, her rifle up and ready. And for a moment it had worked. She'd gotten an angle on one shooter, saw him clearly. Young, nervous, his rifle wavering. Then Daniel had broken cover. She never knew why. Maybe to provide the covering fire she demanded. Maybe because he'd seen something she hadn't. Maybe just to protect her the way he always had. The shot caught him center mass. She heard it, that terrible wet sound of lead finding flesh. Heard his grunt of pain and surprise. Turned just in time to see him fall. The scream that tore from her throat wasn't words. Wasn't even human. It was pure animal grief, and it rang through the canyon like judgment. She'd run to him, abandoning tactics, abandoning sense. A bullet caught her right shoulder, spinning her around, but she kept moving, crawling the last few yards to where Daniel lay in spreading darkness. His eyes found hers, still conscious, still aware. His hand reached for her face, fingers leaving red trails on her cheek. "Not your fault." His voice was fading, each word bought with terrible effort. "Promise me. Don't blame yourself. Daniel, no, stay with me, please." Promise? Tush, she'd promised, lied to a dying man because she couldn't bear to add that pain to his last moments. And Daniel Hayes, the best man she'd ever known, had died believing she'd keep that promise. Above on the canyon rim, she'd seen a figure. Marcus Kane. Not celebrating, not victorious, horrified. His face twisted with something that looked almost like regret before he'd turned and fled. The backup marshals had found her 2 hours later, still holding Daniel's body, her shoulder wound forgotten in the larger agony. They'd tried to pry her away, but she'd fought them until blood loss made her weak enough to manage. 3 months in the hospital, 6 months of physical therapy, and 8 years of living with the knowledge that her arrogance, her absolute certainty in her own abilities, had killed the man she loved. The rain stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving the desert transformed. Water pooled in low places, turning dust to mud. Every surface gleamed, and there, clear as a signature, fresh tracks leading south. Catherine emerged from shelter and examined them with the hunger of a predator finding blood. The rain had been perfect, not heavy enough to wash away everything, but strong enough to make new impressions stand out. She could see individual hoof marks, now could distinguish Ash's prints from the others with absolute certainty. But something new caught her attention. A fifth set of boot prints, these different from the others. Moccasin style, handmade, the distinctive pattern of Navajo craftsmanship. These tracks moved separately from the main group, scouting ahead, checking the back trail. Kane had a tracker, a good one judging by the efficient movement pattern, someone who knew what they were doing. Catherine felt a cold certainty settle in her gut. She knew only a handful of trackers skilled enough to read sign like this, and only one who wore Navajo moccasins and worked outside the law. Running Wolf. The name came with a flood of memory. 10 years ago, they'd worked together, tracking a gang of bank robbers through impossible terrain. Wolf had been 29, then brilliant, dedicated, one of the few trackers whose skills matched her own. They'd become friends, the kind of friendship forged in shared danger and mutual respect. After Samaran passed, they'd lost touch. She'd disappeared into her widow's disguise. He'd continued working, or so she'd heard. But Running Wolf would never work for someone like Kane. Not willingly, which meant coercion, blackmail, threats. The implications made Catherine's hands tighten on her reins. If Kane had leverage over Running Wolf, it meant he'd planned this carefully, knew he'd need the best to track Shadow Tracker, had prepared accordingly. This wasn't just about horses, it never had been. Catherine mounted and continued south, but now she moved with extra caution. Wolf would spot signs she left, would know she was following. The question was whether he'd warn Kane or stay silent. She thought about the man she'd known, honorable, loyal to his family above all else. If Kane threatened that family, Wolf would do terrible things to protect them, but he'd hate himself for it. The tracks led toward Rattlesnake Ridge exactly as Catherine had predicted. The ridge offered the perfect defensive position for an ambush. Narrow approach, high ground for shooters, limited escape routes. If she followed directly, she'd ride straight into a killing zone. So she didn't follow directly. Instead, Catherine veered west, taking a longer route that would bring her around behind the ridge. It would cost time but save her life, and she'd learned 8 years ago that time was less precious than breath. The detour took 3 hours. The sun hung low when she finally approached Rattlesnake Ridge from an unexpected angle, using terrain and shadow to mask her approach. From this position, she could see the entire setup. 2 men, one on each side of the narrow passage. Professional positioning, good sight lines covering each other's blind spots. She recognized one from wanted posters, Beck Reynolds, young and eager, wanted for cattle theft in New Mexico. The other she didn't know, but the silver-decorated spurs marked him as Mexican. Probably one of the vaqueros who drifted north looking for easier money than ranching offered. Catherine settled into position on the high ground behind them and waited. Patience was a tracker's greatest weapon. Most people couldn't stay still, couldn't resist the urge to move to act. But Catherine had learned stillness from Apache warriors who could wait for days if necessary. She watched, learned their patterns, saw how Beck checked his pocket watch every 15 minutes, nervous and impatient. Saw how the Mexican, who she mentally tagged as Silver Spurs, scanned the horizon with professional regularity, but favored his right side, possibly guarding an old wound. After an hour, Beck's patience broke. He should have been here by now. Shut up and keep watching. Silver Spur's accent confirmed Catherine's guess. Sonoran, educated but hardened by years of rough living. Crow was certain someone was trailing us. Crow, the name meant nothing to Catherine, but it confirmed her suspicion about a tracker. Running Wolf's Navajo name was Crow Caller, close enough to be deliberate. She filed away the intelligence and continued watching. The sun touched the western horizon, painting the rocks in shades of blood orange. Perfect light for what she needed to do. Catherine pulled out the mesquite call Gray Eagle had given her. She'd practiced with it for years, could mimic everything from hawk cries to coyote howls. Now she pursed her lips and blew gently, creating the sound of a wounded pronghorn antelope. The cry carried on the evening air, desperate and enticing. Fresh meat was hard to resist in country this barren. She waited 5 minutes, then repeated the call. Closer this time. More urgent. Beck's head came up. You hear that? I hear it. Ignore it. But that's meat. Real meat. We've been eating jerky for 3 days straight. The job is to watch this pass. 5 minutes, that's all I need. Silver Spurs hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes, no more. And keep your eyes open. Beck moved off his position, heading toward the source of the sound. Catherine circled through the rocks, silent as her namesake's shadow, positioning herself along his route. When he passed within 10 feet of her hiding spot, she stepped out behind him. Colt aimed at the center of his back. Don't move. Don't call out. Beck froze, every muscle locking. Catherine could almost see the calculations running through his young mind. Could he turn fast enough? Draw his gun? Shout a warning? That would be unwise, Catherine said quietly, reading his body language. Your rifle's at the wrong angle. I won't miss. Who are you? His voice was tight with controlled fear. The owner of the silver dun your boss stole. Now lower your rifle. Slowly. He obeyed, bending carefully to set the weapon on the ground. Eyes forward. Don't turn around. You don't know who you're dealing with, lady. Marcus Kane will... Kane is exactly who I'm here for, Catherine interrupted. Now you're going to answer some questions. How many men does Kane have? Silence. Your partner can't help you, and Kane won't come back for you. You're alone. Make smart choices. A longer silence. Then where are the horses going? Beck hesitated, weighing his options. Finally, Dead Man's Pass, Old Spanish Mission at the north end. And after that, in Mexico, horse trader named Vasquez out of Sonora. Pays cash, no questions. Catherine processed this. It matched her understanding of Kane's operation. Professional, organized. How many runs has Kane made? This is the 7th this season. Never hits the same place twice. Plans everything. One last question. Catherine's voice hardened. The tracker, Running Wolf, why is he working for Kane? Beck's shoulders sagged slightly. I don't know details, but Kane's got something on him. Family, I think. Keeps them somewhere, threatens them if Crow doesn't cooperate. The confirmation settled like lead in Catherine's stomach. Wolf was a prisoner as much as those stolen horses. Before she could decide her next move, a sharp whistle cut the air. Silver Spurs checking on Beck's absence. We're going to visit your friend, Catherine said. You'll walk ahead of me, Hannah's where I can see them. Try to warn him, and this ends badly for everyone. She bound Beck's wrists with leather cord and took his rifle. Together they moved back toward the ridge, Catherine's gun never wavering. Silver Spurs saw them coming and immediately understood the situation. His hand dropped toward his holster. I wouldn't, Catherine called. Your partner's standing right in my line of fire. You're not. The Mexican's eyes narrowed, taking her measure. Senora, you are making a mistake. Probably not my first. Drop the gun. For a long moment the tableau held. Then the heavens opened again, a sudden deluge that turned the world into sheets of water. Visibility dropped to yards. Silver Spurs saw his chance and dove for cover. His pistol clearing leather as he rolled. His first shot went wide, kicking dust near Catherine's feet. Her return shot was precise, clipping the rock inches from his head and showering him with stone fragments. That was a warning, she shouted over the roar of rain. The next one won't be. Caught between them. Beck dropped to his knees. Neil, don't be stupid. She could have killed us already. Lightning split the sky, and in that frozen instant of illumination, Catherine saw Silver Spurs, Neil trying to circle behind a cluster of scrub oak. Her next shot splintered the branch beside his head. This ends two ways, Catherine's voice carried absolute certainty. You surrender and live, or you keep fighting and prove my reputation wasn't exaggerated. What reputation? Neil shouted back, genuine confusion in his voice. Before Catherine could answer, Beck called out from his position on the ground, panic clear now. Neil, I think she's that marshal, the one Ives talked about before he went down the shadow. The word hung in the rain-soaked air. Shadow tracker. For several heartbeats, only the storm spoke. Then slowly Neil's pistol slid across the mud toward Catherine's position. The Mexican rose with his hands clearly visible. I surrender, Senora, he said carefully. If you are who he says you are, only a fool keeps fighting. Catherine felt no triumph, only weariness in the familiar weight of a reputation she tried to bury. She secured both men, checking their weapons, ensuring they posed no further threat. As she worked, her mind was already moving ahead. Kane knew she was coming now. Beck and Neil's failure to check in would tell him that much. The element of surprise was gone. But perhaps that had never existed anyway. Perhaps Kane had always known she'd come, had counted on it. The question was why. Through the rain, Catherine saw something she'd missed before. A set of tracks fresher than the others leading away from the ridge. Moccasin prints moving with the efficient stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Running Wolf, he'd been here watching. And now he was gone, heading back to warn Kane. Or heading somewhere else entirely. Catherine looked at her prisoners, then at the tracks disappearing into the storm. A decision point. She could take Beck and Neil back to Copper Springs, collect Bradford and his posse, do this the safe way. Or she could continue alone, following Wolf's trail, trusting that the man she'd known 10 years ago still existed somewhere beneath the coercion. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The storm was passing, leaving the desert washed clean and temporary streams running through every low place. In an hour, the tracks would be perfect, clear, readable. Catherine made her decision. She bound Beck and Neil to a sturdy mesquite, tight enough to hold, but not tight enough to cause real harm. Bradford's posse will find you by morning. Tell him everything. Tell him Catherine Hayes is heading for Devil's Playground. Tell him to bring help. You're going after Kane alone. Beck's voice held disbelief. Catherine didn't answer. She mounted the Appaloosa and turned south, following Running Wolf's tracks into the gathering darkness. Behind her, Neil called out in Spanish, words carried on the wind. Vaya con Dios, Shadow Tracker. You will need God's help where you go. Catherine rode into the night, the desert alive around her, with the sounds of water and wind. Somewhere ahead, Marcus Kane was waiting. Somewhere ahead, Running Wolf walked a path between duty and betrayal. And somewhere ahead, the truth about Samarin Pass waited to be spoken. For 8 years, Catherine Hayes had run from that truth. Now she rode toward it, and the woman who emerged from the storm looked nothing like a widow. She looked like exactly what she was, a hunter on the trail of her prey. And the hunt had only just begun. Catherine found Running Wolf 2 miles from Rattlesnake Ridge, standing in the moonlight beside a natural spring where water pooled in ancient stone. He wasn't hiding. His paint horse stood tethered nearby, and he faced the direction from which she approached, as if he'd been waiting. When she rode into the clearing, he raised both hands, slowly showing them empty. Sarah. His voice carried across the space between them, deep and familiar. It's been a long time. Catherine dismounted but kept the Appaloosa between them, her hand resting on the rifle scabbard. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, even with old friends, especially with old friends who worked for Marcus Kane. Wolf. She studied him in the silver light. He'd aged well. 39 now, his face carrying more lines, but the same quiet strength she remembered. His hair hung long and loose, traditional Navajo style, and he wore buckskin that had been worked soft as cloth. Beck told me about your family. Something flickered across Running Wolf's face. Pain quickly masked. Then you know I had no choice. I know Kane is holding them hostage. We're Navajo reservation. 2 of his men watching them. If I don't report back every 3 days, they die. His hands lowered slowly. I've been tracking you since Rattlesnake Ridge. I could have warned Kane. I didn't. Why not? Running Wolf looked away toward the spring where water trickled over stone with a sound like whispered secrets. Because 10 years ago, you and Daniel pulled me out of Canyon de Chelly when flash floods came. Because you've never lied to me. Because I'm tired of being something I'm not. Catherine felt the old familiarity returning, the easy partnership they'd once shared. But 8 years had taught her caution. Kane knows I'm coming. Your silence won't change that. No, but I can help you get to him. Running Wolf turned back, and in his eyes, Catherine saw the same exhaustion she felt. The weight of too many compromises, too many pieces of yourself sold for survival. There's a way into Devil's Playground that Kane doesn't know about. A cave system on the west side. I scouted it last week, didn't tell him. Why would you help me? Because Sarah Hayes was the most honorable person I ever worked with. And because Kane is using me to hurt people. That's not who I am. He paused, then added quietly, and because I think you need to hear what Kane has to say. Catherine's hand tightened on the rifle. I don't need to hear anything from the man who killed my husband. That's just it. Running Wolf stepped closer, his voice urgent now. I've been with Kane for 3 months. I've heard him talk. Sarah, I don't think he meant to kill Daniel. I think Samaran Pass was an accident that's eaten at him the same way it's eaten at you. The words hit like physical blows. Catherine's breath caught her carefully constructed wall of certainty cracking. You're defending him. I'm telling you what I've seen. A man who killed Jack Morrison 2 years after Cimarron Pass. A man who's been planning this for months, not to hurt you, but to bring you back. Running Wolf gestured to the south toward Devil's Playground. He could have killed you a dozen times, Sarah. Rifle shot from distance. Ambush in town. But he didn't. He took Ash because he knew you'd come, and he's waiting to tell you something he thinks you need to hear. Catherine wanted to reject it, to cling to the clean narrative of villain and victim she'd maintained for 8 years. But doubt had entered insidious as poison. She thought of Kane's face at Cimarron Pass, visible for just a moment before he fled. Not triumphant, horrified. Even if that's true, she said slowly, he's still a criminal. He's still hurt people. Yes, and he should answer for that. Running Wolf's gaze was steady. But maybe the person he hurt most is you, and maybe hearing the truth is the only way you stop hurting. The spring whispered beside them. Somewhere distant, a coyote called. Catherine felt the weight of 8 years pressing down the accumulated grief and guilt and rage that had shaped her into half a person. Your family, she said finally. Bradford can't have them protected. I sent word before I left Copper Springs. Running Wolf's eyes widened. You did? Of course I did. You're my friend Wolf, even if you've been forced to work for the wrong side. She moved around the horse, no longer using it as a barrier. But I need you with me, really with me. Not just avoiding betrayal, but actively helping. For a long moment, Running Wolf stood silent. Then he nodded, the decision settling over him like a weight being lifted. Okay, I'm with you, all the way. They shook hands, the grip firm and familiar. Catherine felt something unknot in her chest. She'd been alone for so long, carrying everything herself. Having someone she could trust, even conditionally, changed the equation. Tell me about Devil's Playground, she said. Everything. Running Wolf pulled a stick and began drawing in the soft earth, mapping the canyon system with quick, sure strokes. Main entrance here guarded. Box canyon here where the horses are kept. Ash is separate near the spring. Kane is alone most of the time sitting by the fire. Corso Vele patrols. How often, Shaw? Every 2 hours. Regular as clockwork. Professional. Catherine studied the rough map. And this cave system you mentioned? Here. Running Wolf marked it. Narrow tight in places, but it comes out on the rim above the box canyon. Perfect high ground. When does Corso patrol next? Running Wolf checked the stars with practiced ease. 2 hours, just before dawn. Then we move in 1 hour. Hit him during the patrol before he gets back to Kane. Catherine looked at her old friend. I don't want killing Wolf, not if we can avoid it. Agreed, I've done enough I'm not proud of. He paused, then asked quietly, what will you do when you face Kane? Catherine didn't answer immediately. She turned to look south toward where Marcus Kane waited in the darkness. After 8 years, she would finally confront the man she'd blamed for everything. The man who, if Running Wolf was right, might be as much a victim of that day as she was. I don't know, she admitted finally, but I'm going to find out. The cave entrance was exactly where Running Wolf said it would be, hidden behind a tumble of boulders that looked natural but had been arranged by human hands centuries ago. Apache probably, or the people who came before them. The Southwest was layered with secrets like this, passages and hideaways known only to those who lived close to the land. Catherine and Running Wolf moved through the darkness with the practiced silence of people who'd done this kind of work before. No words, just hand signals and the absolute trust that comes from shared danger. Her shoulder ached from the old wound, aggravated by the climb and the weather change, but she pushed the pain aside. Focus was everything. The passage narrowed until they had to move sideways, stone pressing close on both sides. Catherine's breathing stayed steady, controlled despite the claustrophobic press of rock. She'd been in tighter spaces, had crawled through drainage tunnels in pursuit of fugitives, had squeezed through crevices that seemed impossible for a human body to navigate. 20 minutes of careful movement brought them to a ledge overlooking Devil's Playground. Catherine looked down and saw the scene exactly as Running Wolf had described. The box canyon opened below, perhaps 30 feet down. 11 horses stood in a makeshift corral, shifting nervously in the pre-dawn cold. And there, separate from the others, gleaming silver in the fading moonlight, was Ash. Her heart clenched at the sight of him. He stood proud, head high, not broken by the captivity. The bloodline of Apache war horses ran true in him. No ropes bound him, no fence held him. He could leave any time he chose. But he remained as if waiting for something, waiting for her. A fire burned low near the canyon wall. Beside it alone sat Marcus Kane. Even from this distance, Catherine could see how he'd aged. 53 now, his beard more gray than black, his shoulders carrying a weight that went beyond years. He stared into the flames with the expression of a man haunted by ghosts only he could see. "Where's Corso?" Catherine whispered. Running Wolf pointed. "There, making his rounds." Catherine spotted him, then moving along the canyon's perimeter with professional efficiency. Corso Vale Kane's second in command. Dangerous, competent, loyal. Taking him down wouldn't be easy. "I'll handle him," Running Wolf said quietly. "You get into position above Kane." Catherine wanted to argue to insist she take the risk herself. But Running Wolf was right. He knew Corso's routine could approach without raising immediate alarm, and she needed to be in place when Kane realized what was happening. "Don't kill him," she reminded her friend. "I won't. But Sarah, if things go wrong, if he gets the drop on me, you do what you have to do. Understood?" Catherine nodded, though the thought of killing anyone, even a criminal like Corso Vale, sat heavy in her gut. 8 years ago, she'd killed in the line of duty without hesitation. Now, after years of trying to be something gentler, the old certainty felt more like burden than duty. Running Wolf slipped away into the darkness. Catherine waited, counting heartbeats, watching Corso's patrol pattern. When Wolf made his move, it was swift and silent. He stepped from shadow behind Corso, his arm coming around in a chokehold designed to cut blood flow to the brain without crushing the windpipe. For a moment, it worked perfectly. Corso went limp, unconscious, but alive. Running Wolf lowered him to the ground and began binding his hands. Then Corso's eyes snapped open. Catherine saw it happen in horrible slow motion. Corso's hand, which Wolf thought secured, pulled free. The glint of a hidden knife. Wolf's gasp of surprise as the blade found his shoulder. The two men went down together, struggling. Catherine didn't think, just moved. She scrambled down the rocky slope, Winchester in hand, abandoning stealth for speed. 20 feet above them when Corso broke free and grabbed his fallen pistol. The gunshot shattered the pre-dawn silence. Running Wolf jerked backward, blood blooming on his shoulder. Not fatal, but enough to put him down. Corso raised the gun for a second shot, and Catherine's rifle spoke first. Her bullet took him in the leg as calmly as intended. Not a killing shot, a stopping shot. Corso screamed and went down, his pistol spinning away across stone. Then the world erupted. Kane was on his feet, gun drawn, swinging toward Catherine. She dropped, rolling behind a boulder as his shot spanged off rock where she'd been standing. Her shoulder screamed protest, the old wound tearing fresh, but she kept moving. "Stop!" Kane's voice rang out, commanding. "Stop right now, both of you!" Catherine came up behind cover, rifle aimed at Kane's center mass. "Drop the gun, Marcus." To her surprise, he did. The pistol clattered to stone, and Kane raised his hands slowly, deliberately. His face, visible now in the growing light, showed no fear, only a strange kind of relief. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I'm glad you came. Don't move." Catherine kept her rifle steady, but something felt wrong. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Kane should be fighting, running, anything but standing there with his hands up, and that look of almost peaceful acceptance on his face. Running Wolf groaned, clutching his wounded shoulder. Catherine wanted to go to him, but she couldn't risk taking her eyes off Kane. "Help him," Kane said, gesturing to Running Wolf. "I won't move. You have my word." "Your word means nothing to me." "Then shoot me." Kane's voice was calm, reasonable. "You've got the shot. Clean, easy. Finish what we started 8 years ago." Catherine's finger rested on the trigger. One pull, one moment of pressure. Justice for Daniel. Revenge for 8 years of grief. The solution to everything. But she couldn't do it. Not like this. Not with him standing there unarmed, offering no resistance. That wasn't justice. That was execution. "Wolf," she called, not taking her eyes from Kane. "How bad? Shoulder?" Running Wolf's voice was tight with pain. "Went through. I'll live." "Tie up your wound. Best you can." While Running Wolf worked on his injury, Catherine and Kane remained locked in their standoff. Dawn was breaking now, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and pink, beautiful, indifferent to human drama. "Why did you take Ash?" Catherine asked finally. Kane lowered his hand slowly, non-threateningly. "Because I knew you'd come. And because we need to talk, Sarah. Really talk. About what happened at Samarin Pass. About the truth you've been running from." "I know the truth. You killed my husband." "No." Kane's voice carried absolute certainty. "Jack Morrison killed your husband. Without my permission. Against my direct orders. And 2 years later, I killed Jack Morrison for it." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She'd known about Morrison's death, had heard the rumors, but she'd never connected it to Samarin Pass, had never considered that Kane might have executed his own man for disobedience. "You're lying." "Am I?" Kane's eyes held hers. "Think, Sarah. Really think. What did you see on my face that day? Triumph, satisfaction, or horror?" Catherine's mind raced back, replaying the moment. Kane's expression when Daniel fell. Not the face of a victor, the face of a man who just destroyed something precious. She'd seen it, registered it, then buried it beneath rage and grief. "The plan was to capture you." Kane continued, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still morning air. "Not kill, never kill. I was going to trade you for my brother, a marshal for a prisoner. Simple, clean. But you and Daniel came at us hard, and Jack panicked. He fired without orders." "Stop." Catherine's voice shook. "Just stop." "I can't stop, Sarah, because for 8 years you've been blaming yourself for Daniel's death. And for 8 years I've been watching you bury yourself alive with that guilt. So yes, I stole your horse. Yes, I brought you here because someone had to make you face the truth." "What truth?" Catherine's vision was blurring, tears threatening. "That neither of us killed Daniel Hayes. Jack Morrison did. And he's dead. And we've both been punishing ourselves for a tragedy neither of us could prevent." Running Wolf, his shoulder now wrapped in makeshift bandages, spoke up. "He's telling the truth, Sarah. I've seen Kane's journal, read his account of that day, the guilt he carries, the nightmares. He's as haunted by Samarin Pass as you are." Catherine wanted to reject it, needed to reject it. Because if Kane wasn't the monster she'd made him, if Samarin Pass was truly an accident, then 8 years of her life had been built on a lie. 8 years of hiding, of half-living, of denying who she was. All of it for nothing. The rifle wavered in her hands. "Daniel died because we walked into your trap. Daniel died because I was arrogant enough to think I could control a situation in combat." Kane's voice was gentle now, almost kind. "Sarah, we both made mistakes that day. You trusted your skills too much. I trusted my men too much. And a good man died because of it. But punishing yourself won't bring him back. Neither will punishing me." "Then what do you want?" Catherine's voice broke on the last word. "I want you to forgive yourself. And maybe if you can find it in you, forgive me." Kane took a careful step forward, because the world lost something precious when Shadow Tracker disappeared. And I think it's time she came back. Before Catherine could respond, a movement caught her eye. Corso Valley, forgotten in the emotional intensity, had crawled toward his dropped pistol. His leg wound bled freely, but desperation gave him strength. "Kane!" Corso shouted, raising the gun. "Get down!" Everything happened at once. Kane dove toward Catherine, knocking her aside. Corso fired. The bullet meant for Catherine took Kane in the shoulder, spinning him around. Running Wolf lunged from his position, tackling Corso, despite his own injury. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs and blood. Catherine scrambled to her feet, her rifle swinging between the struggling men, and Kane, who lay gasping on the ground, blood spreading across his shirt. "Wolf, get off him!" Running Wolf rolled away, and Catherine put herself between them and Corso, her rifle aimed at the wounded man's head. "It's over, Corso. Put the gun down." Corso looked up at her, his face twisted with pain and rage. He was going to give up, going to let you take him. After everything we built, he was just going to surrender to the woman who destroyed his family. "I brought justice," Catherine said quietly. "That's all I ever did. You brought death." Corso's hand tightened on his pistol. "Drop it." A new voice rang out, cold with authority. Marshal Thomas Bradford stood at the canyon entrance, flanked by Ben Cooper and a half-dozen armed men. Behind them, Catherine could see Grace Miller carrying her medical bag. Corso's shoulders sagged in defeat. The gun fell from his fingers. Bradford walked forward, taking in the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every variation of human violence. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Wolf, looks like you've had an interesting morning. Marshall, Catherine lowered her rifle, suddenly exhausted. Kane needs medical attention. So do you from the look of that shoulder. Bradford gestured to Grace, who hurried forward with her bag. Ben, secure the prisoner. The rest of you check those horses. As Grace worked on the wounded, Bradford pulled Catherine aside. There's something you need to know. We found correspondence in Beck Reynolds' effects, letters from someone calling himself the Baron. Catherine's attention sharpened. The Baron. Code name, but we matched the handwriting to land deeds and contracts. Bradford's face was grim. Catherine, the man behind this whole operation, the one who's been paying Kane to disrupt ranchers and force land sales, is Otis Caldwell. The name hit Catherine like cold water. Otis Caldwell, the wealthy rancher who'd seemed so concerned about his lost horses, who'd questioned her tracking abilities, who'd been positioning himself to buy up failing ranches at bargain prices. He sacrificed his own horses to throw off suspicion, she said, pieces falling into place. Smart play. Made him look like a victim when he was the mastermind. Bradford looked at Kane where Grace was bandaging his shoulder. Kane didn't even know. Thought he was working for some anonymous railroad magnate. Caldwell kept his identity secret, used intermediaries. Catherine walked over to Kane, who sat propped against a rock, pale but conscious. You didn't know who hired you? No. Kane's voice was weak. Just got letters and money. The Baron wanted ranchers disrupted, land values dropping. I thought it was about railroad expansion. Standard robber baron stuff. It was about land accumulation. Caldwell's building an empire. Catherine knelt beside him. He used you, Marcus. Used your anger at me, your need for money. Played you like a fiddle. Kane's laugh was bitter. Seems we're both guilty of being manipulated. He looked at her, his eyes direct despite the pain. Sarah, what I said before. I meant it. About Samarin Pass. About everything. Catherine was silent for a long moment, kneeling in the dust beside the man she'd hated for 8 years. The man who'd just taken a bullet meant for her. The man who, for all his crimes, had been trying to give her back something she'd lost. I believe you, she said finally. About Daniel, about the accident. She paused, then added quietly, but you're still a criminal, Marcus. You've hurt people, stolen, destroyed lives. I know, and I'll answer for it. Kane managed a small smile. But at least you know the truth now. That's what I wanted. More than freedom. More than revenge. Just for you to know you weren't responsible. Grace came over, having finished with Running Wolf. Marshall Hayes let me see that shoulder. Catherine stood, letting the doctor work. She walked to the edge of the canyon and looked out at the desert painted golden in the morning light. Behind her she could hear Bradford organizing his men, Corso cursing his luck, Grace murmuring medical instructions. Running Wolf came to stand beside her, his shoulder bandaged, but his spirit seemingly lighter. How do you feel? I don't know. Catherine touched the place over her heart, where for 8 years a stone of guilt had sat. Lighter, maybe? Confused. Angry that I wasted so much time. Time's never wasted if you learn from it. Ancient Navajo wisdom. Common sense, Running Wolf smiled. Sarah, what are you going to do? Stay Catherine Hayes the widow, or become Shadow Tracker again? I don't know if I can be her anymore. Maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe you can be both. He gestured to the canyon, to the resolution they'd brought. This is what you're good at. Tracking, finding truth, bringing justice. The world needs that. Needs you. Before Catherine could answer, Ben Cooper came running up, breathless. Marshall Hayes Bradford says we need to move fast. Otis Caldwell is at the town hall right now, probably covering his tracks. If we don't get back quick, he'll disappear. Catherine looked at Running Wolf, then at Bradford. The marshal was watching her, waiting, seeing what she'd do. She thought of Daniel, of what he'd want. Not revenge, not withdrawal, action, justice. The work they'd both dedicated their lives to. Let's ride, she said. They rode hard back to Copper Springs, leaving 2 deputies to guard Cane Corso and the stolen horses. The sun climbed high as they pushed their mounts, and Catherine felt something awakening in her that had been dormant for years. The clarity of purpose, the focus of the hunt. She was Shadow Tracker again, whether she wanted to be or not. They reached Copper Springs, and half the time, it should have taken horses lathered and blowing. The town hall was packed, again another meeting about the horse thefts. Through the windows, Catherine could see Otis Caldwell at the front playing the concerned citizen, organizing a reward fund for information. Bradford deployed his men around the building, blocking exits. Then he, Catherine, and Running Wolf walked in through the front door. The room fell silent as they entered. Caldwell's face, schooled and concerned, flickered just slightly when he saw them. A micro-expression gone in an instant, but Catherine caught it. Fear. Marshal Bradford. Caldwell recovered quickly. Any news on the horses? All recovered, Mr. Caldwell. Bradford walked to the front of the room, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Horses are safe, thieves in custody. Case closed. Wonderful news, Caldwell beamed. I told everyone your posse would succeed. When can I collect my property? Your 3 horses are with the others, but there's a complication. Bradford pulled a folded letter from his jacket. We found this in Beck Reynolds' possession. Letter from someone calling himself the Baron, giving detailed instructions on which ranches to hit, which horses to take. The room buzzed with interest. Caldwell's smile didn't waver, but Catherine saw his hands tighten on the podium. How interesting, Caldwell said smoothly. These criminals are more organized than we thought. Very organized, professional even. Bradford unfolded the letter. The handwriting is distinctive, educated, expensive paper stock. He looked directly at Caldwell. Same paper you use for your business correspondence. The room went deadly quiet. Marshal, if you're suggesting... Caldwell's voice carried outrage, but his eyes were calculating distances, exits. I'm not suggesting, I'm stating. Bradford gestured to Ben Cooper, who brought forward a ledger. Your land purchases over the past 6 months. 15 ranches, all bought below value. All after their owners suffered mysterious livestock losses. Coincidence, bad luck in the valley. And this. Catherine stepped forward, her voice cutting through Caldwell's protestations. She placed a brass button on the podium. Scorpion gang mark, found at my ranch, but also found in your study when Deputy Cooper searched it this morning. Caldwell's face went white. You had no warrant. Didn't need one. You left your study unlocked when you came to this meeting. Ben Cooper's young face was set with determination. The whole box was sitting on your desk. Buttons, correspondence, payoff records, everything. Catherine watched Caldwell's expression change, saw the moment he realized the game was over. His hand moved toward his jacket, going for a hidden weapon. Don't. Her Colt was in her hand before he completed the motion, aimed at his chest with the steadiness of someone who'd drawn 1,000 times. Not worth it, Otis. Caldwell's hand froze. His eyes met hers, and she saw the calculation there. Could he draw fast enough? Could he shoot through the crowd and escape? I'm faster, Catherine said quietly, and I don't miss. For a long moment, they stood frozen. Then Caldwell's shoulders sagged. His hand moved away from the jacket, rising slowly in surrender. Bradford moved forward and removed a small derringer from Caldwell's pocket. Otis Caldwell, I'm arresting you for conspiracy theft and attempted murder. Take him, Ben. As they led Caldwell away in chains, the room erupted in conversation. Ranchers who'd been terrorized now learned their nightmare had been orchestrated by one of their own. The wealthy outsider they'd trusted had been predator, not peer. Catherine stepped outside, needing air. The sun was high now, the heat building. She found a bench in the shade and sat suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the morning drained away, leaving only weariness and the persistent ache in her shoulder. Grace found her there 10 minutes later, sitting with medical supplies. Let me check that wound properly. Catherine submitted to the examination in silence. Grace's fingers were gentle but firm, probing the injury, checking for fresh damage. You tore it open again. Not badly, but enough to need rest. Grace applied fresh bandages. Catherine, you can't keep doing this to yourself. Doing what? Pushing until you break. You've been running on empty for 8 years. Today you learned the truth about Cimarron Pass, hunted down criminals, and exposed a conspiracy. That's 3 lifetimes of stress in one day. I'm fine, thawing. You're not. Grace sat beside her, setting aside the medical supplies. But maybe that's okay. Maybe healing isn't about being fine. It's about facing what happened and choosing to move forward anyway. Catherine looked at her friend, at the kindness in her face. He took a bullet for me, Grace. Marcus Kane, the man I blamed for everything. He threw himself in front of a gun to save my life. People are complicated. Villains can do heroic things. Heroes can do terrible things. Grace took Catherine's hand. What matters is what you do now. Do you go back to hiding or do you accept who you really are? Before Catherine could answer, Bradford appeared, running wolf beside him. The marshal held a folded document, official-looking, with territorial seals. Mrs. Hayes, or should I say Marshal Hayes, Bradford offered her the document. This is your official reinstatement. Special Territorial Marshal operating from your ranch with full authority across Arizona territory. Catherine took the paper, staring at it. Her old life offered back. The badge she'd hidden for 8 years now legitimate again. There's no pressure, Bradford continued. You can decline. Go back to your ranch, your horses, your quiet life. No one would blame you. Catherine thought about Daniel, about what he'd say if he were here. She knew the answer. He'd tell her to do what made her whole, to stop living in half measures and guilt, to honor his memory by being fully alive. She looked at the document, then at the 3 people watching her, Grace, who'd protected her secrets, Running Wolf, who'd risked everything to help her, Bradford, who'd known the truth and said nothing, waiting for her to be ready. I accept, Catherine said, on one condition. Name it. Running Wolf works with me as a consultant. The territory needs good trackers, and he's one of the best. Running Wolf's eyes widened. Sarah, I worked for Kane. I helped steal those horses. Under duress, to protect your family. That's not crime, Wolf. That's love. Catherine looked at Bradford. He gets immunity in exchange for testimony against Caldwell and Kane. And a job. Bradford considered, then nodded. Done. The territory can always use good men. He extended his hand to Running Wolf. Welcome aboard. As they shook hands, Ben Cooper came running up again, this time with a telegram. Marshal Hayes, this just came, from Judge Redfern in Santa Fe. Catherine opened it and read, Congratulations on Caldwell. Arrest, stop, more work needed. Stop, barren network larger than Arizona, stop. Request your assistance, tracking other cells. Stop, the territory needs shadow tracker, stop, Redfern. She folded the telegram and put it in her pocket. More work, more tracking. More justice to pursue. The thought should have exhausted her. Instead, it energized her. I need to see Kane, she said suddenly. Bradford raised an eyebrow. He's in Doc Miller's surgery getting that shoulder fixed. Under guard. I still need to see him. They walked together to Grace's clinic where Marcus Kane lay on the examination table, his shoulder bandaged and his wrists chained to the bed frame. He looked up when Catherine entered, his expression unreadable. Sarah. Marcus, she pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. The guards stepped back, giving them privacy but staying close enough to intervene if needed. They're taking you to territorial prison. Trial in 6 weeks. I know. Kane's voice was calm, accepting. I'm guilty of enough to hang twice over. I'm going to testify about Cimarron Pass, about what really happened. Kane's eyes widened slightly. You believe me? I believe you. About Daniel? About Jack Morrison? About the accident? Catherine leaned forward. But Marcus, you're still responsible for every crime you committed after. The thefts, the threats, the violence, that doesn't go away because you feel guilty about Daniel. I know, and I'll pay for it. He managed a small smile. But Sarah, knowing you understand, knowing you don't carry that guilt anymore, that makes the price worth it. Why, Catherine asked the question that had burned in her since their confrontation. Why go through all this? Why risk everything to tell me the truth? Kane was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. Because I destroyed the person I most admired in this world. Shadow Tracker was a legend, Sarah. People talked about you in saloons from Texas to California. A woman who could track a ghost across bare rock. Who brought justice without mercy, but also without cruelty. Who did the work because it was right, not because it was profitable. He shifted his chains, rattling. When you disappeared after Cimarron Pass, I knew it was my fault. Not just Daniel's death, but yours too. Because you buried yourself alive out there on that ranch, and I couldn't live with that. So yes, I stole your horse. Yes, I brought you here. Because the world needs Shadow Tracker. Even if bringing her back cost me my freedom. Catherine felt tears burning in her eyes. For 8 years, she'd seen Cain as a monster. Now she saw him as what he truly was. A broken man trying to make amends the only way he knew how. I forgive you, she said quietly, for Samarin Pass, for Daniel. I forgive you, Marcus. Cain's face crumpled. For a moment, the hardened outlaw disappeared, replaced by a man who'd carried unbearable weight for too long. Thank you, he whispered. That's all I wanted. Catherine stood ready to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. I'll speak at your trial. Tell them about the accident, about your remorse. I can't promise it will change the sentence, but I can promise the truth will be heard. That's all I ask. Catherine walked out into the afternoon sun feeling lighter than she had in years. The guilt that had weighed her down was gone. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but transformed into something she could carry without it breaking her. She found Ash waiting outside the clinic tethered to a post. Someone, probably Ben Cooper, had brought him from Devil's Playground. The silver dun nuzzled her shoulder when she approached, his soft breath warm against her neck. Hey boy, she murmured, stroking his mane. We're going home. 2 weeks later, Catherine stood on the porch of Shadow Ridge Ranch, watching the sun set over Coyote Ridge. The evening was cool, peaceful, the kind of quiet she'd once craved, but now found almost unsettling. She'd spent too many days on the trail, too many nights tracking to fully settle back into stillness. But it was good to be home. Ash stood in the corral, his silver coat catching the last light. He'd taken to ranch life again, as if the whole ordeal had never happened, though. Catherine noticed he watched the horizon more carefully now. Some lessons couldn't be unlearned. The sound of hoofbeats brought her attention back. Running Wolf rode up, looking better than he had in months. His shoulder was healing well, and more importantly, the haunted look in his eyes was gone. His family was safe, reunited with him. He had honest work ahead, purpose without compromise. Sarah. He dismounted. Bradford sent this. He handed her an envelope. Inside was her new badge, the silver star of a territorial marshal, along with a letter of commission. She pinned it to her vest, feeling the weight of it, not burden, responsibility. Also a case. Running Wolf pulled out a telegram. 10-year-old boy missing in Red Canyon. Family's desperate. Local sheriff is out of his depth. Catherine read the telegram, already seeing the terrain in her mind, planning routes, considering possibilities. The old instincts, dormant but never dead, surging back to full life. When do we leave? Whenever you're ready. Catherine looked out at her ranch, at the life she'd built here. For 8 years, it had been her prison, her penance. Now it was simply home. A place to return to between hunts. A place to rest, but not to hide. Give me an hour to pack, she said. After Running Wolf left to prepare, Catherine walked down to the corral where Ash waited. She opened the gate and stepped inside, not to catch him, but simply to stand with him. The Mustang came to her, pressing his forehead against her chest in the way horses do when they trust completely. We've got work to do, boy, she told him. A boy needs finding, and there will be others after that, always others. Ash snorted, as if in agreement. Catherine thought about Daniel, wondered what he'd say if he could see her now. She knew the answer. He'd smile that gentle smile of his and tell her to be careful, but not too careful, to do the work that mattered, to be who she was meant to be. I miss you, she whispered to the evening air, but I'm not running anymore. I hope that makes you proud. The wind carried no answer, but Catherine didn't need one. She knew. That night, she sat at her small desk and wrote in her journal the first entry in 8 years. Today, I reclaimed my name. I am Sarah Catherine Hayes. I am Shadow Tracker. I am a widow and a marshal, a rancher and a hunter. I am all these things at once, and I am finally whole. Marcus Cain awaits trial. I will speak for him, tell the truth about Samarin Pass. He will still go to prison, may still hang, but he will go knowing he gave me something precious, freedom from false guilt. Running Wolf rides with me now. Together we will track the lost, find the hidden, bring justice where justice is needed. This is the work Daniel and I chose long ago. This is the work I will continue in his memory. The desert remembers everything. Every step, every breath, every drop of blood spilled in its dust. For 8 years I tried to make it forget Sarah Hayes. But the desert never forgets, and now neither do I. I am Shadow Tracker. And I am home. She closed the journal and went to bed, sleeping dreamlessly for the first time in 8 years. When morning came, she and Running Wolf rode out toward Red Canyon, following the trail of a missing boy, following the call that had defined her life. Behind them, Copper Springs woke to a new day. Ahead, the desert stretched endless and unforgiving, holding its secrets close. But Catherine Hayes knew how to read those secrets, knew how to follow trails invisible to others, knew how to bring the lost back home. The shadow moved across the land once more, and the desert whispered its approval. The hunt continued,